Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I want to welcome you. Welcome to 2026, Babylon a Year. We are reading the Bible from Genesis to Revelations from January to December. So, welcome and welcome back to those who are already on this mission, and to the ladies who are part of the women's ministry. This is week 6 review, and when I tell you I have had a time trying to get this review out to you guys, normally I try to have my review posted on Saturdays. This weekend had an event to do, and so I tried to pre-plan, and I did a little pre-planning through the week, but Saturday still hit hard, and I was supposed to wrap up things on Sunday. That didn't happen. And so I am having a time or had a time trying to get this out to you guys, but it is going to be well worth it. Um, so sit back and relax and walk through the word. I know you probably already read, or hopefully you've already done your reading, but I want to just dive in just a little bit to show us life application, how what um, they were going through back then is applicable for your life now. And so there are a lot of things dealing with God's character, dealing with different themes that the people faced back then, and it's still applicable now. And so I hope that you enjoy, you get something out of it. And if you're looking for something more, have any questions, please feel free to leave comments. Okay. So this week we're still on Leviticus, the book of Leviticus, which we know is about God teaching his people to be holy, to set them apart. A lot of emphasis was put on the priests and the different sacrifices that they needed to make. Um, but we also enter into the book of Numbers. And so Numbers deals with, or we open it up in Numbers, it deals with them being counted, numbered, and then God preparing them into to enter into the promised land. So we're going to cover a little bit about that. Actually, the reading was from Leviticus chapter 19 through Numbers 15 for this week. So we finished up week 5. Um, it ended in Leviticus chapter 18, and so we are here currently um, ending in Numbers 15. But again, the reading was from Leviticus 19 through Numbers chapter 15. And so this is where we are. Again, this is one of our staple slides, so we will keep it. It's just giving you an outline of things to come along with the New Testament roadmap. We went over this last week, Leviticus, just giving you a little detail about the book of Leviticus. And so here we have the book of Numbers. So this is just a little recap or a little summary of what Numbers is about, who it was written by, when it was written, and why it was written. So Numbers also was written by Moses. It is a part of the Torah. We know that the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament is considered the Torah, and so it's believed to have been written between 1450 and 1410 BC. And it pretty much shows you the journey of the Israelites from Mount Sinai into the Promised Land. Um, it starts off looking at Numbers 1. We see them being counted or being organized. The tribes are positioned in a certain way. And God is doing this, and He's going to form an army of His people. We also see the generational record. So it documents the transition of the first generation, the ones who God delivered from bondage in Egypt. And we see, um, I don't want to say we see them being made an example of, but pretty much God shows that second generation how he deals with disobedience, how he deals with people who fail to trust and believe in his promises. right? Who rebel against him. And so um, we see a lot of complaining, continuous complaining and rebellion from them, and even treason against God, right? They think they are rebelling against Moses, but Moses is looking at them once again, like he did before, saying, "Who are we? Who am I?" Uh, and Aaron, that you should rebel against us, because if you rebel against us, you're really rebelling against God, but you don't even see it that way. But anyway, we see all of this, and we also see them, or see God preparing them to enter into the promised land. So it is a lot in the book of Numbers, and we're only going to cover up to Numbers 15 today, but it's still packed with a lot. Who is God? Again, this is one of our staple slides. Seeing God the Father, God the Son, who is Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. And we see all of this throughout the text that we're reading. So, again, as I go through a recap of the readings, I'll make mention of some things, but we definitely see God's character in everything that we're reading, and a lot of foreshadowing of Jesus. Leviticus chapter 19 through chapter 22. So here we see holiness in everyday life, in leadership, in worship, and in the offerings presented. And we see what the consequences are for not being holy and not respecting the boundaries that God sets. I think most of my time was spent on Leviticus 19, chapter 19, more than any other chapter in this past week's reading, because it really spoke to identity. It really um, helped me to see um, that in order to reflect holiness in everyday life and living, then that means that I have to reflect God in my dealings with you, in my conversations, in my interactions. And so we know that we are commanded to love everyone. The Bible commands for believers. Um, to love everyone, your neighbors, your enemies, and that mirrors the unconditional love shown by God. But it begs the question: how do you love someone with the love of God and you don't even like them, right? Because that's a real thing. I can love you, but I really don't like you. I don't like your ways. I don't like the way that you go about doing things, right? It's a real thing. And so, although um, I have to love you because I'm trying to get to heaven, right? God commands me to get to heaven, but what do you do in that situation where you know you're commanded to love, um, but I don't want to just love you just because God tells me to love you. I really want to do it um, because God sees my heart, and I'm not putting on, but it's just something that will not let me 100% fully surrender to accepting you for who you are, right? Because I find that some of your ways may be a little shady, or um, there are just some things that I just don't like. That's a real thing, whether you're honest with yourself or not. Uh, that's a real thing. But I want to address that because we can do it by seeing them through God's eyes, right? There is something that's holding you back from really liking a person, from really full out loving them with the love of God, right? Um, And so, whether that means you have to forgive them of something that they did, um, whether you need to set a boundary, um, sorry, I was interrupted. Whether you need to set a boundary, you can do all of that, but you do it by being patient and kind and compassionate. And that's the part for me, that's the part that um I really need to work on, that you can get there. You can get to the point where you can love people with the love of God, but you have to do it with having that kindness, that patience, that compassion. And so we're going to get into all of that. But touching on Leviticus chapter 19, it calls God's people to reflect his holiness in ordinary living, how they speak, work, love, and treat the vulnerable. This chapter blends worship and ethics. God establishes a community where justice and compassion and reverence shape every interaction of the Israelites. It shows that holiness is not confined just to the tabernacle, which is considered the church. It is expressed in fields, in homes, in conversations, in business dealings. God ties worship to ethics. Okay? You cannot claim and link your identity to Him and mistreat people. The two just don't go together. So He commands generosity towards the poor, which requires honesty in speech, fairness in judgment, and love for your neighbor. Holiness becomes a lifestyle that mirrors God's character. So the takeaway is that holiness is seen in the way that we treat people. We should be treating them the way that God treats us. It's lived, it's not just believed, right? I can't just have the thought, I have to have the action. God cares about how we treat people. Um, and so we see that boundaries, integrity, and love are all forms of worship. So for women, this chapter speaks to the sacredness of your daily life, your work, your boundaries, your relationships, your voice. It affirms that your integrity, compassion, and justice seeking are holy. It reminds us as women that God sees us fully. The emotional labor, the resilience, the advocacy, and the love you pour out to others, all of that is tied to worship. And so something that stood out um, is that self-worth is seen as holiness. Okay. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 2 commands us to love your neighbor as yourself. And if holiness means set apart, and we know that it does, then we need to see our own value and self worth and love ourselves before we can even love others. So the question is, how do we as women, and I'm going to say as women, um, see ourselves? How do we define our self worth outside of the labels and stereotypes that society has placed on us? And how does the command to be holy empower us to reclaim our image as sacred rather than something to be scrutinized by society? Well, number one, we have to anchor our identity in divine purpose rather than the stereotypes that is placed on us. We are who God says we are, not man. Okay. Man tells us that we're not relevant, we're too old, we're too young to make a change. We don't know enough. We don't need to act on certain things. We should just wait and let it play out. We don't have enough experience. We're not educated enough. Our looks are not appealing enough. We're too overbearing. We're too loud. We're too black. We're too dark. We're too fat. Or we're losing too much weight too fast. And God says, you are enough. Your identity is based on your relationship with Him through Christ Jesus. We are God's creation. Psalms 139, verse 14 says, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. Okay. John 1 verse 12 says, but to all that believed him and accepted him, he gave the right to become children of God. So this tells me that I am his child. Once I'm baptized into Christ, I put on Christ, and I am no longer a stranger wandering aimlessly in the wilderness of life like the Israelites. He claims me as a child of God, and I am an heir to his promises. Okay. God declares us to be loved according to John 3:16. He loved us so much that he gave his one and only son so that everyone who believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. That eternal life is one of his promises that I am an heir to. Okay. God says that even before he made the world, he loved us. He chose us in Christ to be holy. And without fault in his eyes, he decided in advance to adopt us into his own family by bringing us to himself through Jesus Christ. This is what he wanted to do, and it gave him great pleasure, according to Ephesians chapter 1, verses 4 through 5. Okay. Second Corinthians chapter 5, verses 16 through 17 says, so we have stopped evaluating others from a human point of view. At one time, we thought of Christ merely from a human point of view. How different we know him now. This means that anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone, a new one has begun. This means that I am a new creation in Christ Jesus. John 1 verse 17 says the law was given through Moses, but God's unfailing love and faithfulness came through Jesus Christ. Okay. Galatians chapter 8, verses 31 through 39 speaks about how nothing can separate us from the love of God. It tells us that we are more than conquerors. So, in addition to knowing that your identity is based on your relationship with God through Jesus, we are created in his image. A lot of times we hear image and we think of physical appearance, right? But we know that that means spiritually, right? God's character, his image, is what we should be pursuing daily. So that we can have the ability to love others as ourselves. But touching a little bit on the physical image, we should reclaim our image. And that means replacing any shame that you may feel with truth. Okay. When I was going through this, the movie Color Purple came to mind, right? It reminded me of a scene in the movie where everybody was always riding Seeley. You sure is ugly. You know, Mister, you ugly. You poor. You black. You a woman. Imagine constantly facing those criticisms day in and day out. Somebody telling you the opposite of what you believe yourself to be, and it wears and tears on your spirit. But we have to overcome those negative narratives that's placed on our lives by others. And when I say um overcome, I do mean overcome, because we can't say I'm going to change your negative perspective that's on my life. We have to overcome that which we can't control, right? That's not in our control. We can't control other people's minds. And so we have to overcome them, um, and do the internal work to empower ourselves, right? We have to reject those definitions placed on us, and embrace our true worth. Looking at First Corinthians chapter 6, verses 12 through 20, it talks about sexual sins. But looking specifically at verses 19 and 20, it says your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who lives in you and was given to you by God. You do not belong to yourself, for God bought you with a high price. So you must honor God with your body. So this means caring for your body, proper rest, nutrition, self-care. All of that is seen as an act honoring God, and your body is a divine creation created by God. And I know all of this is lengthy, and it seems like I'm going down a rabbit hole, but I want you to see that we first have to love ourselves physically and spiritually before we can love our neighbors as ourselves. So, going back to how you value yourself, um, I have a list of about 9 or 10 things that I'm going to go through. So, number one, um, and I'm giving this list because here we're talking about holiness in everyday living, right? And these are things that we have to face every day. And so that's why I'm kind of stuck on Leviticus chapter 19, because the bulk of our living um it's it's interactions with people, right? You have to work. You go to church. You're raising children. You have family. You have community organizations and stuff that you're a part of. And so we got to learn how to maneuver, how to interact with people. And we have to teach people how we want to be treated. And we have to treat people how we want to be treated, right? And so I'm just going to go through this list to help us on that journey. So if you're not appreciated, what should you do in situations where you're not appreciated? Keep your distance. Keep your distance. What does that look like in valuing others? Learn how to appreciate other people no matter how they show up, big or small. Show them you appreciate them. That's what we can learn from that. Saying thank you and having a genuine thank you can carry you a long way. So just going back to this past weekend, um, a family friend and church member had a birthday celebration, and so many people did so many things to help him pull off his birthday celebration, and he was so grateful and so thankful, and he acknowledged those people, right? Um, and it wasn't just for show. You know, you can feel a person's spirit when they're genuine. You can, it's just something about it. And not only the public acknowledgement, because I'm not a person that requires you to acknowledge them. I don't like limelight. I really I like being in the background of things. But for a person to come to you one on one and have that conversation to show their appreciation, and you see that side of them that is, you know, they're truly thankful and genuine and having that conversation with you, that goes a long way. That makes you say, okay, if you ever need me again, I'm here for you. Right? It's the small things. And so we need to learn how to show up um and say the things that need to be said from a genuine place, from a genuine heart. And it will carry you a long way. And that's what I'm trying to teach my child. And she's a thankful individual, but you know, it never hurts to drill that in them that, hey, always tell people you're thankful and you're grateful. Always show it. You know, sometimes we may say it, but it don't even seem like it because it seems, you know, you seem, you know, I don't know if you have that sense of you can feel people's vibes, but yeah, their actions don't really show that they're appreciative. But anyway, that's that on that. That's number one. If you're not invited, don't go. If you're not invited, don't go. The flip side to this is there are times you might can't invite everyone, but you should be open and don't always exclude people from your life. How will they ever know? How will they ever get to know you or you them? So this is something I've had a conversation with my daughter about is quit inviting yourself to people's events. Quit inviting yourself. And not that it happened multiple times, but don't just assume that somebody made a mistake and didn't invite you or forgot to tell you. Mm-mm. We don't show up and go where we're not invited. We don't. So let that be a lesson. You don't always have to be with the in crowd. You don't always have to show up because maybe you were not invited for a reason. Not gonna stay too long on that. Moving on. If you're invited late, decline. I don't know about you, but if someone invites me somewhere last minute or late and they knew about it and just didn't say anything, nine times out of ten, I just decline. I say no. But the flip side of that is proactively communicating your plans to people so that they can make a timely decision. So I'm at fault on that. I really do believe I did communicate something that was going on with my child. But the flip side of that is that the day of the event, like literally an hour or so before the event, you know, I sent out a message, hey, she got something going on. And then it was like, oh, I didn't know about it. And sometimes we can get so busy with life that maybe it slips our mind, right? I try to do good about writing things down, being in my calendar, make sure I communicate, but sometimes things get lost in the cracks, right? It happens. But that person could have said, okay, well, I'm just not going to make it. I hope y'all have fun. Send me a pic, right? And I would have been fine with that because the fact that you let me know that you didn't know and I thought I had communicated it, then that's fine. I don't have an expectation for you to show. I'm just letting you know what's happening, right? And so, just a word on that. If you're ever invited to something late, don't feel obligated. Show. Because guess what? You are in control of your time and your space and what goes and what comes. That's your life. And if something is coming in late, you're not obligated to show up. And that goes for any situation, right? I do that with meetings at work, right? If I get a last minute meeting, 5 minutes before the meeting is to appear, I'm getting messages, hey, we have a meeting. Da, 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 da. I already have something on my calendar. I'm not going to be able to attend. Why was I an afterthought? Now, if there are times when I don't have anything going on, I may or may not show, or I may ask somebody else, what is this meeting about? Who is responsible? Whose work does this fall up under? Why am I being asked to attend? Sometimes I decline. I'm not going because why are you pulling me in last minute? Okay. Learn how to say no. Learn how to not feel obligated to show up. Okay. Number four, if you're ignored, stop approaching people. If you're being ignored, stop approaching people. Stop reaching out. Now, I will say this, this is applicable if you don't even know why you're being ignored, right? Um, but the flip side of that is don't ignore people. People have feelings, and it's a bad feeling when you get ignored and you didn't do anything to anybody. Um, or you just don't know why you're being ignored. Okay. Now there are situations where you do have to ignore uh people for reasons, but I would say, use discernment with that. Use discernment. Somebody in your DM, they ain't got no business there. You have to ignore. I'm not touching that. Stay on over there, right? So there are certain situations um or you do have to ignore, but don't do that intentionally to people who um, I want to say want to be included, should be included, um, but practice love, practice um, not being intentionally uh, away from people or out of reach from people because you never know what people need, right? Now, I am an introvert, 100%. I love me time. I like being to myself. I don't like a whole bunch of conversations. However, if you get me in the right mix with the right people, you wouldn't even see that side. You would see the extroverted side. I don't proactively reach out to people to engage and do all that's just not me. I love being by myself. I absolutely love it. Um, but it's not always good to be by yourself. I will say that. Anyway, going down the rabbit hole. Number five, if you are betrayed, forgive and move on. You have to sometimes forgive people even when you haven't received an apology. Forgiveness is for you, so you can move on with your life and not have that weight bog you down. Um, How can you avoid this? You need to acknowledge when you mess up or when you've offended someone and immediately right the wrong. Always have a spirit of wanting the best for others and yourself. You need to value your friendships, your relationships, value your community and your villages and your churches, value people. So when it comes to that time when something happens and you're offended, you can forgive and move on. I see it, I felt it, and I'm moving on. I had to learn to do a lot of that in 2025. And so I think that the Lord was positioning me um for now because um when I say I'm nonchalant in a good way, I'm nonchalant in a good way. I can see things and I am happy and I'm glad for you and I'm moving on because God has got to work in me and I'm busy minding my business, staying in my lane, doing things that I think he would have me to do. And so I can't get bogged down over somebody that trespassed against me or made me feel some type of way. Baby, move on. I got other things to focus on. And so we need to practice that moving on. Forgive and move on. Of course, you'll never forget it, right? Those are some of the things that we want to forget, but we're not gonna forget it. We can forgive. We need to practice forgiveness. All right. Number 6. If you feel forgotten, this is gonna sound harsh. Excuse me. If you feel forgotten, forget them. What did she just say? If you feel forgotten, forget them. Is the mic on? Yeah. Disappear out of sight, out of mind. Why do we crave being seen by people? Why do we do that? It's everywhere. Why do we crave being seen by people? I see it every single day. People at work, people at church, people in our community. Why do we need to be seen by man when God already sees us? Look at Rachel and Leah and Jacob. Look at that situation. Out and miss. God, God already saw them, and yet they wanted that human eye, that human validation, that human approval. God sees our hearts, our efforts, and yet we just feel the need to prove ourselves to people who could care less about us. But how do we avoid this? We need to learn how to cherish people. Never make people feel like they don't matter because you don't know a person's mental capacity, right? Just because I may be able to handle something that I don't care what people think or care if they see me or not because my um I'm a background character, right? I look at myself as a background character. There may be some other people who will go out of their mind if their name isn't called or if somebody doesn't acknowledge things that they do, right? And so we do have to be sensitive to that. But if you ever feel like people don't see you, you have to get to a place where you can accept that God already sees you. You don't need man's approval, man's validation. You don't need man to see you to prove your worth. Moving on. Number 7, if you are insulted, follow it today. If you are insulted, outshine them. Don't allow people to insult your intelligence or make you feel like you're not capable of doing something. You have nothing to prove to anybody, but sometimes you just have to show up and prove them wrong. Shine bright. Ain't that a song? Is that a Rihanna song? I don't know. There's a phrase that I saw a lot in 2025, and it said, "Let them." And I actually have a shirt. I don't even know what the shirt is, but it says "Let them," and on the back is just a whole bunch of things. Um, it's saying, but basically, it encourages people to let go of the need to control what other people think about you. Let go of trying to control the narrative and just focus on you. Period. All right. Um, Number 8. This is going to be a little lengthy. Um, if you feel used, which many of us do, feel used sometimes, set firm boundaries. Okay. Communicate your needs and limits clearly to others. This helps others understand what behaviors are acceptable and what are not. Okay. You got to let people know, hey, what's your boundary? What's your limit? They're not going to ask you because until you say something, they're going to keep going, keep asking, keep requesting until you say, hey, I can't do that. This is what I can do. And once you let them know what you can do, then that's a boundary for them. Like, okay, I see what you're saying. I acknowledge that, but until you communicate what those your needs and your limits are, they don't know. So you cannot expect them to respect it. Okay. Identify your needs. Recognize what you need in your relationships. Do you need others to know that you are only available during a certain time? Do you need them to communicate their needs for you to do something in days, weeks, or months in advance? Have you identified and communicated what role you see them in your life and how best you need for them to show up? Are you an introvert and you value alone time? That would be me. Okay. You have to identify your needs. All right. Practice saying no. Practice saying no. This is going to help you avoid overcommitting and feeling drained by people. You can't complain that you're tired of this or tired of that and that you're drained if you keep showing up and doing the things that other people want you to do and you have no boundaries. Clearly you're okay with it. All right. Be mindful of emotional responses. Reflect on how your boundaries are being respected. You might have communicated your boundaries and people have forgotten. So you need to reiterate and reset expectations. It's a real thing. Like sometimes we'll get frustrated and in the heat of the moment, um, you know, we'll lash out. Maybe somebody forgot that that's a boundary for you or that's a limit, or just kindly remind them, hey, remember I told you back then that I can't do this, so it's still applicable now. I don't have the capacity to do it. I wish I did, but I'm sorry I can't. All right, so just reiterate and reset expectation. Next, avoid common mistakes. So avoid setting boundaries in the heat of the moment. If you see that a boundary has been crossed, like I previously stated, make note of it and learn how to address it in a healthy way so that you are still able to reflect God's character in that moment, right? Because we as people will act in the heat of the moment. We will have people cross us or cross a boundary, and immediately in that moment, um, we'll tell them off. Some of us will cuss them out, or you'll start talking to yourself. Because I'll talk to myself in a heartbeat. Baby, I don't know who you talking to. Let me walk away. I will do that. to talk myself down, right? That's a real thing. You can be real with yourself or not. I'm being real with myself. I have to calm myself down and walk away. So to avoid um, those making mistakes that you may end up regretting, right? So sometimes we may have to just shut our mouth in the moment and not say anything and just walk away. And when you're ready, come back to it. Okay. All right. Going back to the list, number 9. If you feel disrespected, walk away with dignity. You absolutely do not have to stand and take someone disrespecting you. And to be honest, most people that I know will get you told real quick without second thought. Um, if they feel like you're touching on the brim of being disrespectful. But we need to make a mind shift, right? We need to shift that mindset, because disrespect can occur at different levels, right? Um, and so if it's at a level where it allows you to walk away, take your stance, let that energy speak for you, um, and take it in and walk away, right? Now for me, and when I'm in the moment of something, my face says it all. It just does. Um, as Black women, we have a lot of mannerisms about us. Um, and one thing about it, baby, our face says a lot about what we're thinking. So, I have yet to conquer controlling my facial expressions. Um, but we're gonna work on that in 2026. But don't waste your energy on people who will never get you, and who don't have that level of respect that you need for them to have for you. So the flip side of this, how can we avoid it? Respect everybody, no matter their position, their title, their color, their faith, their race. Just respect people. A lot of stuff is going on in the world right now, and if we had a little more respect, it wouldn't be happening. It would. I'm not gonna touch too much on that. Number 10, if you feel underestimated, let your results speak. That's self-explanatory. Don't talk about it, be about it. You don't have to validate who you are to other people. We will never measure up to man's standards. We need to quit trying. It's draining, it's depleting. You sit around and you think about it at night. Let it go. Let it go. All right, that is all that I have for Leviticus chapter 19. That was so lengthy. Was that like 30 minutes that I spent on that? Oh my goodness. I told you, I'm trying to get through this. Okay, I'm gonna move faster. Um, yeah. Well, Leviticus chapter 20. So, this chapter emphasizes the seriousness of holiness by showing the consequences of rejecting God's ways. God protects his people from destructive patterns by establishing boundaries around worship, sexuality, and community life. This chapter is not about fear, it's about protection, and God draws clear lines around behaviors that destroy families, that distort worship and break community trust. He calls Israel to live differently from surrounding nations, not out of being superior to them, but out of covenant identity. They had to be set apart. Holiness becomes a shield of protection for our identity and future. It preserves generational wholeness. So, this chapter reinforces that identity as God's people requires distinction. Boundaries protect our identity. God takes harmful patterns seriously. Holiness requires intentional choices, and consequences are meant to preserve life, not punish aimlessly. I think an unforgettable part of this chapter was when God warns the Israelites that the previous inhabitants of the land were vomited out of the land because of their practices. And we know how nasty vomit is. But that feeling you get when you vomit, that uncontrollable, that pulsating feeling, that's exactly what would happen to the Israelites and what they would face if they chose to live by the customs of the people that God had previously drove out. And so he calls for them to live differently as a matter of survival and inheritance of the promised land. And he does us the same way today. There's so much temptation in the world today. And I think a lot of it stems from music that we listen to. A lot of times I don't even have the radio on. I'm content in my thoughts in the quiet. If I don't have it on, the radio on, like I said, I'm quiet. If I do have it on, I'm trying to either listen to gospel or listen to a podcast or listen to something that is motivational or encouraging. But I've been young. I've been young. Music is good, make you feel good, right? But I think the music nowadays has these young people in such a stronghold. They don't know how to disassociate from it. It's one thing to have a good time, but the vulgar music, the slanderous, it's just it's too much, you know. And we can't point the finger too much on the young people, right? We've been young before. We like Luther, we like Teddy Pendergrass, Earth, Wind and Fire, it had us under wraps too, right? But it's a judgment free zone. But the music nowadays have people out here doing reckless, crazy things, unaliving people, robbing people, stealing. It's crazy, right? Anyway, I digress. Um, for women breaking cycles, healing trauma, reclaiming identity. This chapter affirms that God supports your boundaries and honors your healing journey. This chapter speaks to the necessity of boundaries in a world that often demands too much from women. It affirms your right to say no, to protect your peace, to break generational cycles, and to choose life giving patterns. God honors your boundaries because they guard your wholeness. So keep setting your boundaries. Leviticus chapter 21 highlights the sacred responsibility of those who represent God. So leaders are called to live with integrity, wholeness, um, and honor because their lives influence the community. The closer a person is to the presence of God, the higher the standard of holiness that's expected. So, God protects the dignity of leadership by setting standards that reflect His holiness. The priests were visible symbols of God's holiness, so their lives needed to reflect His character. God protects leaders from burnout, compromise, and dishonor by giving them boundaries that preserve their dignity. So he established clear boundaries for time and labor, as seen as what with the Sabbath, with Jubilee, with the festivals that they were to celebrate. He sets boundaries regarding who leaders could associate with and how they should conduct their private lives, preventing a slow drift into compromise. Right? He didn't want to compromise their holiness and their being set apart to do His work. Um, and God protected their dignity or the dignity of their position by making it sacred. As long as they stayed within God's boundaries, God Himself defended their honor. So leadership is not just about position, it's about representing God well in everything that you do. So in this chapter, we learn a lot. Leadership requires integrity. Calling carries a lot of weight. God cares about the inner life of leaders, and wholeness matters in spiritual influence. So, um, and I want to say this and relate this to us as women, especially Black women leading in multiple spaces. This chapter affirms that leadership, no matter the role, is holy, and you deserve protection, rest, and honor. Okay, we as women, we lead, right? We lead in communities, we lead in our families, at work, and even in ministry work. This chapter affirms that however you may lead, it's sacred, it's a heavy responsibility, and you should take it seriously. All right. God sees the weight that leaders carry, all right, and He calls you to lead from wholeness and not from exhaustion. Leviticus chapter 22 teaches that worship must reflect God's holiness. Priests and people must approach God with reverence, integrity, and honor. God protects the sacredness of worship by ensuring that what is offered to Him is whole and worthy. This chapter shows that worship is not casual. In worship, God invites His people to honor Him with offerings that reflect His worth. He protects the sacredness of worship by ensuring that what is brought before Him is whole, intentional, and pure. It's not about performance. So we see that it's sacred. Worship is sacred. God deserves our best. Reverence matters, and holiness shapes how we approach Him. For women who worship through pain, through pressure, and perseverance, this chapter affirms that God sees the purity of your offering and honors the sincerity of your devotion. This chapter speaks to the sacredness of your worship, your service, your giving, your devotion to Him. It affirms that God sees the purity of your heart, the sacrifice of your praise, and the integrity of your offering, even when others overlook it. Man may see the outward appearance or the value of the gift, while God assesses the purity of the motive and the integrity of the heart behind the offering. Um, Taking a look at what God require or asks of us, be holy. He commands us to be holy. What does that mean for us? What should be our response? We should reflect God's character. Practice justice. Be fair and truthful. Love your neighbor. Treat people with dignity. Keep God's statutes. Live distinctively. Separate from harmful patterns. We have to protect our identity. Be set apart. Embrace your calling. Honor the calling. Lead with integrity. Maintain purity. We need to protect influence. Honor His name. Worship Him with reverence. Bring whole offerings. Give God your best. Keep His commands. Live in alignment with Him. Remember His holiness. Approach Him with awe. Leviticus chapter 20 through chapter 26. So here God establishes rhythms. He commands rest and restoration. He defines what worship should be and what justice looks like. And he promises blessings and consequences. So looking at Leviticus chapter 23, it outlines God's calendar. So a holy rhythm of Sabbaths. Um, Feasts and sacred gatherings. Each appointed time teaches Israel to pause, remember, celebrate, and to realign with God. The chapter reveals that even time is holy when it's surrendered to God. It shows that God does not want his people living in a constant grind. He establishes sacred pauses, weekly Sabbath, seasonal feasts, annual celebrations. These rhythms teach Israel to trust God, to honor him with their time, and to remember his faithfulness. And God forms a community that rests, rejoices, and remembers together. And I think this chapter is very important because we get so bogged down by the hustle and bustle of life. We're always on the go, and it's always something to do, and we do not properly pause and rest and rejoice and reset, um, and give God the thanks that He deserves for letting all that happens, right? So although all those things are happening and we're happy about them, He also requires us to sit back, reflect, rest, um, and just reflect together, rejoice, right? So I don't think we put as much weight on those things as we do the hustle and bustle of life. Anyway, here we learn that rest is commanded. It's not optional. God builds these rhythms into our lives for renewal. Celebration is spiritual. Remembering God's goodness strengthens our identity. So, for women carrying heavy loads, this chapter affirms that rest is not being lazy. God commands it, and He invites us into rhythms that restore our soul and protect our health. Keyword: health. Protect your health. And this is something that um, I wish I had have done early on in life, right? You think you're young and, again, caught up in the hustle bustle of life, things have to happen. You have to make things shake. Staying up all night studying and working on these different projects and needing rest. Needing rest. God requires it. He made us. He knows our bodies. And we need to rest. But I digress. This chapter affirms your need for rest, joy, and sacred pauses, and not to succumb to the pressures of carrying a lot of weight, or carrying the weight of people's demands on you. Your time belongs to God. Be productive, yes. But again, my greatest takeaway is that God wants me to rest and reset. Leviticus chapter 24, it highlights the continual presence of God through the lamp and the bread. So it also establishes principles of justice, showing that God's holiness shapes how the community handles harm, accountability, and fairness. This chapter blends worship and justice as expressions of God's character. The lamp burning continually symbolizes God's unending presence. The bread of presence represents God's provision and fellowship. The justice section shows that God's holiness extends to how people treat one another. Harm must be addressed, dignity must be protected, and justice must be fair. And God's presence and his justice flows from the same holy heart. His presence is constant. Worship and justice are connected. Accountability protects community, and God values fairness and dignity. So, for women facing injustice or invisibility, this chapter affirms that God sees, he stays, he defends. It speaks to the God who sees injustice Okay. And he remains present in that suffering. It affirms that your cry out for fairness, dignity, and accountability is seen. God's presence is not passive, it's protective. All right. Leviticus chapter 25 introduces radical rhythms of rest and restoration. Every seventh year, the land rests. Every 50th year, debts are forgiven. The land is returned and people are restored. God reveals himself as the owner of all things and the restorer of his people. The Sabbath year teaches trust. The land rests and God provides. Jubilee resets the community, preventing generational poverty and restoring dignity. God refuses to let oppression, debt, or loss define his people. Let me say that again, because that's something as Black people, um, that's something that we face. God refuses to let oppression, debt, or loss define his people. He builds restoration into the calendar. God builds restoration into the rhythm of his people's lives. So rest is built into creation. God cares about economic justice. Restoration is God's heart, and we are stewards, not owners. For women carrying weight, this chapter affirms that God brings rest, release, and restoration, even to places that feel stuck. This chapter speaks to women carrying those generational burdens, financial strains, or emotional exhaustion. God is a restorer. He breaks cycles, resets stories, and brings rest to places that have been overworked and overlooked. Looking at Leviticus 26, it presents two paths: blessings that flow from obedience and consequences that follow disobedience. Yet, even in discipline, God promises not to abandon his people. The chapter reveals God's covenant love, firm, faithful, and restorative. The blessings include peace, provision, fruitfulness, and God's presence. The warnings show the natural and spiritual consequences of rejecting his ways. Yet the chapter ends with hope. God remembers his covenant and restores his people when they return to him. So even when we fail, God's covenant, his covenant love reaches for us. What can we learn here? We learn that obedience brings flourishing. Disobedience carries weight. God disciplines to restore, not to destroy us. And his covenant love never ends. So for women navigating hardships, consequences, or in cycles of struggle. This chapter affirms that God's love is stronger than your mistakes or your mishaps. He restores what was once broken and remembers his promises over your life. This chapter speaks to women who feel the weight of consequences again, of regret or of brokenness. God does not abandon you. He restores, he rebuilds, and he remembers his promises. Your story is not over. Looking at what God requires or asks us to do. Keep the Sabbath. How do we do that? Rest intentionally, right? We know that the Sabbath is holy. And here in the text, he was requiring them to rest, right? So we need to rest intentionally. Observe his feasts, honor sacred time, remember his works, celebrate faithfully, offer gratitude, worship with joy. Keep the lamp burning, honor his presence, maintain holy bread, remember his provision, uphold justice, treat all fairly. Let the land rest, trust his provision, proclaim jubilee, restore others. Treat the poor kindly. Uphold dignity. Remember, God owns all. Live as stewards. Walk in his statutes. Live aligned. And that means lived aligned to them. Keep his commandments. Honor his ways. Return when you fall. Repent and trust him. Remember his covenant. Receive restoration. Leviticus chapter 27 through Numbers chapter 3. So here we see God regulates vows and dedications. He organizes Israel for purpose. He positions the tribes around him, and he sets the Levites apart. So looking at Leviticus 27, chapter 27, it teaches Israel how to handle vows and dedicated things with integrity. So God provides a system for valuing and redeeming what is offered to Him, showing that devotion must be intentional and honorable. This chapter is about honoring what we dedicate to God, whether a person, an animal, or land. God provides structure that protects both the worshiper and the community. Vows are not emotional reactions, they are sacred commitments. God teaches Israel to give thoughtfully, redeem responsibly, and treat holy things with reverence. This chapter closes out Leviticus by emphasizing that holiness includes how we handle our commitments. What you dedicate to God must be handled with integrity. Everything that we offer God has value, and He takes our commitments very seriously. For women who have been pressured to overgive, overpromise, or carry more than they should, this chapter speaks to the commitments that you make to God, to yourself, to your healing, to your calling. It affirms that your devotion is valuable and that God honors the promises that you keep. It reminds you not to overpromise out of pressure, out of guilt or emotion. Your offering is sacred. Excuse me. Moving on to Numbers chapter 1. So, Numbers chapter 1 marks a shift from worship to movement. God organizes Israel into a structured, counted, and prepared community. The census reveals that God is intentional, orderly, and preparing his people for the journey ahead. The census is not about numbers because if you remember earlier, they were counted for tax purposes, but here the census is about identity and readiness. God counts his people to show that none are forgotten and that all people have a place. Israel is being shaped into a nation capable of movement, defense, and purpose. God is building structure around their calling. He had to prepare them to enter the land that he promised. God organizes you before he advances you. If you're anything like me, you feel a sense of having to have things in order in your life before you embark on new work or new journey. And so what does that look like? Well, seeking God's guidance in everything you do, and that includes pre-planning, right? Let him order those steps, setting clear goals and planning, which helps you manage your time more effectively, prioritizing those things that matter most, and embracing God's timing and understanding that God put things into motion at just the right moment. So all of that is inclusive uh, of being organized, of being prepared, right? Before you embark on something. So we should think about those things. For women, this chapter speaks to seasons where God is restructuring your life, your boundaries, your relationships, your routines. It affirms that divine order is preparation. God is aligning you for purpose. Okay? Looking at Numbers chapter 2, um, it reveals God's strategic placement of his people. So the the camp is arranged like a living sanctuary. God is in the middle and the tribes surround him. And if you look back, I don't know if you paid attention to the post um, when I posted on Leviticus 27 through Numbers 3, but looking at how they were arranged, it looks like the cross. So I hope you saw that symbolism there. Every tribe is positioned around his presence, showing that identity and direction flow from God at the center. God teaches Israel that life works when he is at the center and everyone honors their assigned place. Their placement determines their movement, identity, and relationships. The arrangement clearly um, creates for us unity, order, and purpose. So I hope you saw that, the way that they were arranged. This teaches us that your placement is purposeful, not accidental. God positions us intentionally. His presence is at the center of our lives. Community requires order and unity. Let me say that again. Community requires order and unity. Everyone has a place in God's design. So, for women who may feel misplaced, overlooked, out of position, or questioning their place in life, this chapter affirms that God has positioned you intentionally. Your placement is a part of your purpose. God sees exactly where you are and has placed you with intention. Your role, your responsibilities, your relationships, your location are all a part of his design. Okay. Excuse me. All right. Looking at Numbers chapter 3, God sets apart the Levites. So in Numbers chapter 3, it establishes the Levites as God's chosen servants for the tabernacle. And we've heard this a couple of times, right? But looking at Leviticus chapter 3, the Levites are counted, they're set apart and given duties that protect the holiness of the tabernacle. Each clan receives specific responsibilities, showing that service is sacred and structured. Their work was not glamorous, but it was essential. God honors the Levites by giving them a unique calling tied to his presence. God shows that every role in his kingdom matters, especially the unseen ones. So, what do we learn here? We learn that service is sacred. God assigns roles intentionally. Calling is specific, not generic. And God honors those who serve his presence. This chapter speaks to women who serve quietly, who feel unseen or undervalued in families and churches, in communities, in workplaces. God sees your labor, he sees your sacrifice, and he sees your faithfulness. Looking at what God require or asks us to do, um, the command is to honor your vows. We should keep our commitments. Give intentionally, offer with integrity. Prepare for movement. We have to get ready spiritually. Follow leadership. Walk in unity. Camp around his presence. Keep God central. Stay in a assigned place. Honor positioning. Move when he moves. Follow his lead. Maintain unity. Walk in order. Serve the tabernacle. Work faithfully. Protect holiness. Guard God, guard God's presence. And embrace assigned roles. Walk in purpose. Numbers chapter 4 through 7. So here we see God assigns holy responsibilities to the Levites. He protects purity and integrity. We learn about the Nazarite vow and the priestly blessing. And Israel dedicates offerings to God. So the head of each one of the tribes will dedicate an offering to God. So looking at Numbers 4, it details the sacred responsibilities of each Levite clan. Excuse me. Every family has a specific assignment that's tied to the presence of God. So, this chapter reveals the seriousness of serving God's presence. The Kohites carry the most sacred items, but only after the priests cover them. The Gershonites handle curtains and coverings, and the Merarites carry the structure. Each clan's work is different, but it's equally essential. God honors structure, clarity, and reverence in service. This chapter shows that holy work requires order, reverence, and obedience. And it teaches us that your assignment is sacred. Okay. Every calling has weight. Holy things must be handled with care. God assigns roles intentionally, and service requires reverence and precision. So, how can we relate to this as women? So, for women that's carrying heavy responsibilities, this chapter affirms that your work is not random, nor is it unnoticed. This chapter speaks to the unseen labor that you carry, the emotional, spiritual, physical, and relational work and labor that you carry. God sees the weight of your responsibilities and what you have to do. So you don't have to compare your calling to what anybody else is carrying or to their calling. Your assignment is yours alone. So don't worry about what's happening in somebody else's lane. Focus on your own. Pay attention to what God has called you to do. All right. Excuse me. Numbers chapter 5 focuses on maintaining purity and honesty within the community. So God addresses physical impurity, relational harm, and marital trust. This chapter is about protecting the community from hidden harm. Impurity is removed to protect health. Restitution restores relationships. The marital test protects women from false accusations and ensures truth prevails. God values honesty, justice, and relational wholeness. So, what do we learn in this chapter? We learned about relational integrity. We learned that harm must be acknowledged and repaired. Truth matters, and that God protects the vulnerable. So, for women dealing with the betrayal, false accusations, or relational wounds, this chapter affirms that God sees the truth and fights for your dignity. God sees the harm done to you and the harm done by you, and He provides pathways for truth, healing, and restoration. You don't have to carry that false guilt or carry your hidden wounds. He sees all of it. All right. Numbers chapter 6, the Nazarite vow and priestly blessing. Um, Numbers chapter 6 describes a special vow of consecration where individuals set themselves apart for God. The vow includes abstaining from wine, avoiding impurity, and not cutting their hair. And this vow was for men and women. The Nazarite vow is a sacred season of devotion. It's temporary. It symbolizes undivided focus, purity, and surrender to God. The priestly blessing reveals God's heart to bless, to keep, to shine upon, to be gracious, to give peace. God desires closeness with his people. This chapter concludes with God's blessing of protection, grace, and peace. Consecration positions you to receive God's peace and presence. But how does this look? By creating a space for divine encounters and intimacy with God. It involves sanctifying your life through prayer, obedience, and a commitment to God's will, allowing His presence to manifest in your life. It's not just a ritual, it's a transformative process that prepares you for God's glory and presence. By laying down your will and your desires, you become a holy vessel through which God can flow, enabling you to influence others and serve Him effectively. Ultimately, consecration leads to a deeper intimacy with God, allowing you to experience His peace and presence in your daily life. This process is essential for believers to receive God's blessing and fulfill His plans for their lives. Okay? For women entering or in seasons of focus, where you're healing, you're fasting, studying, learning, transitioning, or rebuilding, God honors your consecration and covers you with peace. God honors your intentional devotion. The priestly blessing in Numbers chapter 6, 22 through 27 affirms that God sees you, covers you, gives you peace in the midst of pressure. Okay. So I hope you took time to actually look at the priestly blessing. And there's a few songs um, around the priestly blessing. Looking at Numbers chapter 7, it records the offerings of each tribal leader during the dedication of the tabernacle. Their giving is generous, unified, and joyful. Each tribe brings the exact same offering to avoid comparison and competition. Their giving reflects unity and a shared devotion to God. This chapter ends with Moses hearing God's voice, showing that when God's people give with sincerity, his presence draws near. For women who give deeply and consistently, this chapter speaks to the generosity you pour into your family, into your community, into your church. God sees your giving, your time, your energy, your resources, and he responds with his presence, his guidance, and intimacy. Looking at what God requires and asks of us, um, the command to handle holy things carefully. We should serve with reverence, embrace assigned roles, walk in purpose, work together, honor community, follow divine order, serve faithfully, remove impurity, pursue holiness, make restitution, repair relationships, seek truth, walk in integrity, complete your season, finish faithfully, receive his blessing, walk in peace, bring offerings, give joyfully, dedicate your gifts, honor God, give in unity. We should walk together and listen for his voice. Expect his presence. Numbers chapter 8 through chapter 11. So here we see God consecrate the Levites for service. We see God's timing, his guidance, his presence. He signals them to move. Um, and he responds to burden and complaint. So we see a lot in these chapters. Looking at Numbers chapter 8, it highlights the consecration of the Levites and the lighting of the lampstand. God prepares his servants through purification, dedication, and commissioning. The lampstand represents God's continual presence and illumination. The Levites undergo washing, shaving, sacrifice, and presentation. It's a full body symbol of surrender. I'm going to say that again. The Levites, the people that he chose to do the work of the tabernacle, the people he chose to be holy, uh, they had to undergo cleansing, if you want to put it like that, washing, shaving, sacrifice, and presentation. And it is a full body symbol of surrender. Their service is holy, intentional, and rooted in God's presence. God establishes that those who serve him must first be set apart by him. This chapter shows that service begins with God's light and God's cleansing. And before God will use you publicly, he will consecrate you privately. For women who are focused on doing inner work, on healing or transitioning this season, this chapter affirms that God is preparing you for something sacred. Okay. This chapter speaks to the inner work that God does before he will elevate you. The cleansing, the healing, the preparing, all of that is necessary so that He can dwell within you. God is lighting your path and preparing you for service that flows from wholeness, not from exhaustion. And I'm just going to speak for myself. There is no way, my God, today, the things that I am doing now in trying to um, go through with the Bible in a Year plan, trying to organize the women's ministry just to create this safe place for sisterhood, for womanhood, just to gather, just to um, be in each other's presence, right? There's no way that I would have been able to do it in 2026, 2025. Wasn't there mentally, wasn't there spiritually. God needed to cleanse me of some things. He needed to prune some things, right? He needed to heal some things, still healing some things. He needed to prepare me, still preparing me for work, right? In the process of implementing, still going through the process of doing the inner work, if that makes sense. Um, because there's no way that I could have did it in 2025. And what I just said, doing this from a place of wholeness versus a place of exhaustion. Can't do it. I couldn't have done it. Right? That's all I'm gonna say on that. Moving right along. Numbers chapter 9. Numbers 9 shows Israel celebrating Passover and learning how to follow God's presence through the cloud by day and fire by night. God teaches them to move only when He moves and stay when He stays. The Passover reminds Israel of their deliverance from bondage in Egypt. The cloud and the fire teach them dependence on God. Excuse me. Whether God stays one day or one year, Israel learns how to wait. Excuse me. God even makes provision for those who were clean or far away, showing that no one is left out of His timing. This chapter emphasizes obedience to divine timing. For women who feel rushed or behind, this chapter affirms that God's timing is protective and purposeful. God leads you by presence, not by pressure. You move when He moves. You rest when He rests. And I'm just going to say a little bit about that because uh, I was talking to my sister about this, and then today I talked to my cousin about this. I think that we're getting back into the swing of things, right? For 2 weeks, we were shut down pretty much because of the snow and ice. And, some of us may have fallen behind in our readings or just with tasks that we need to get done. For me, it's getting this video out, right? I had every intention on getting this video out Saturday night at the latest Sunday morning. Excuse me, but life happens, right? Life happens. No matter how much I prepared, because I did do a lot of prep work the week of to prepare for Saturday, and it still just did not come together the way that I wanted it to come together. And I think that it was a lot of it had to do with me deep diving in some things. Like I said, I spent a lot of time in Leviticus chapter 19. Like I just kept diving and kept finding things that I felt like I needed to say and not wait until a certain time to say it. And so, anyway, I digress, going down the rabbit hole again. Uh, yeah, a lot of us didn't get things done that need to get done. We fell behind, missed the mark in some places, but we shouldn't feel rushed. We need rest, right? We shouldn't feel behind, right? Just pick up where you can and keep going. That's all I want to say on that. Numbers chapter 9. Yeah, God's timing. All right, looking at Numbers chapter 10, it introduces the trumpets that signal Israel's movement, worship, and warfare. Um, excuse me. This chapter marks Israel's first departure from Mount Sinai. They're guided by God's presence. God shows that He leads them with clarity, order, and protection. The trumpets unify the nation, calling them to gather, move, or prepare for battle. Israel's journey begins with worship, blessing, and divine guidance. Moses invites Hobab to join them, showing that community is strengthened by shared vision. God leads the way, covering them with his presence. So, for women stepping into unknown territory, this chapter affirms that God signals your steps and surrounds you with protection when he dwells within you. For those stepping into new seasons, new jobs, new boundaries, new healing, new calling, God will give you signals. So pay attention. Surround you with support, and he will go before you in every step of the way if you let him. Okay? Don't stand in his way and don't block him. And it is a scary feeling when you feel like you don't have control, when you learn to surrender and let go. But I have learned that that uneasy feeling is so gratifying. It's scary before you do it. It's scary in the midst of you doing it. But when you learn to surrender and let go, let him have it. It's the best thing that you can do for yourself, for your life, for your future. All right, Numbers chapter 11. It reveals the emotional weight of leadership and the human tendency to complain under pressure. Moses reaches a breaking point, right? And God responds with provision and shared leadership. This chapter shows God's compassion for both leaders and followers. The people crave Egypt's food, forgetting all about their bondage. Moses feels crushed by this responsibility, and God answers both of their needs: quail for the people and elders for Moses. The Spirit rests on 70 elders, showing that leadership is never meant to be carried alone. When you cry out to the Lord, He meets you in your breaking point with provision and support. God hears our complaints. I know He hears our complaints. He knows leaders need support, and He will provide even when we're frustrated. So, for women carrying too much, this chapter affirms that God sends help. He shares your burden and provides what you need. Some are emotionally exhausted in every facet, at work, at home, at church, in your community. Some people are exhausted. You're exhausted from leading, from serving, from mothering, from working, advocating. God sees your heavy burdens and He sends support at your breaking point. You are not meant to carry everything alone. So remember that. Because a lot of time as Black women, we sit in silence and we do it all. We're the super women, right? People want to label us extraordinary, and we are. We are. But we need to recognize when we need to rest. We need to recognize when we need the support because we do not have to carry everything alone. We don't have to do it. We choose to do it. And I think a lot of times, too, we carry a lot because um, the support isn't there. The community isn't there. They are there in words, but not in actions, right? People will say all day long, "Oh, I'm here for you." But you have to open up your mouth and let them know, "Hey, I need you. Can you help me? Can you support me in this effort? Can you XYZ? And then once you put yourself out there, let them make the decision on what they can show up for you as what can they do for you? What are the what's in their capacity to do, to handle, to support you. Um, but yeah, I digress. Let me get back on track. What did God require access to do in these chapters? Um, the command to light the lampstand, walk in his light, purify the Levites, submit to cleansing, present them to God, offer ourselves fully, serve faithfully, honor the calling, keep Passover, remember deliverance, follow the cloud, move with God, trust his timing, rest, rest in his pace, use the trumpets, listen to God's signals, move when he moves, follow his lead, trust his protection, walk with courage, bring your burden, be honest with God. He already knows. Receive support, accept help, trust his provision, believe he will supply, and walk in the Spirit. Lead with strength. Numbers chapter 12 through 15. So here we are getting back into the drama of things. So looking at Numbers chapter 12, it exposes the danger of jealousy and the beauty of humility. Miriam and Aaron challenge Moses' calling, but God steps in as Moses' defender. Miriam and Aaron question Moses' unique relationship with God. This is your brother who delivered you all from Egypt, who has been an advocate for you all this time, and you question him in his relationship with God, my Lord. Instead of Moses defending himself, God steps in. Miriam's leprosy is not punishment, but it's correction. It was a moment for her to pause and reflect on her actions. It was. Moses' intercession shows his humility and compassion. God restores Miriam, proving that discipline is never the end of the story. The chapter reveals that God protects his servants and disciplines with restoration in mind. He had to do what he had to do. His own sister, she had to be corrected. She was out of order. So we learned that jealousy distorts relationships. God defends the humble. Leadership attracts criticism. We do know that. And restoration follows discipline. For women, especially those walking in leadership or calling, who are facing jealousy, criticism, or unfair treatment, this chapter affirms that God sees, defends, and restores. God sees the attacks that you don't respond to, and He protects your name, your position, your purpose. Your humility is your shield, just like Moses. Okay? It's a lot to be learned in that chapter. Numbers chapter 13, it reveals the tension between God's promise and human fear. The spies see the same land, but they interpret it differently. Fear magnifies giants, but faith magnifies God. The land is exactly as God describes it. It's fruitful and abundant, but the majority report focuses on giants, not God. Caleb and Joshua see the same giants, but trust God's power. The people choose fear, revealing how unbelief can sabotage destiny. My Lord. This chapter shows, excuse me, this chapter shows the perspective, that perspective determines destiny. What you focus on determines whether you enter what God promised. God's promises require courage. Faith sees possibility where fear sees danger, and not everyone can carry your vision. For women facing intimidating obstacles, this chapter affirms that your perspective determines your progress. This chapter speaks to women who have been told they're not enough, or they're too much, or they're unqualified. Giants may be real. Racism is real. Sexism is real. Exhaustion, trauma, all of that is real, but God's promise is bigger. Your perspective is spiritual warfare. Excuse me. Looking at Numbers chapter 14, it shows the consequences of unbelief and the depth of God's mercy. Israel rejects God's promise, but Moses intercedes once again on their behalf. God forgives them, but he allows natural consequences to occur. The unbelieving generation will not enter the promised land. The people cry to return to Egypt, preferring bondage over faith. Moses pleads for God's mercy, reminding him of his character. God forgives, but protects the promise by allowing only the next generation to enter. Caleb and Joshua are honored for their faith. So, what do we learn here? We learn that unbelief has consequences. Intercession can change outcomes. Our God is slow to anger, and his mercy is so much greater than our failure. For women who have felt um, or feel delayed in their destiny, this chapter affirms that God restores, forgives, and still leads you forward. You might feel stuck between where you were and where God is calling you. Fear may delay you, but it cannot disqualify you. God's mercy covers your missteps, and his promise still stands. Okay. Looking at Numbers chapter 15, it reestablishes worship practices after Israel's rebellion. God teaches the difference between unintentional sin and defiant sin. After rebellion, God brings Israel back to worship, showing that failure is not the end. He distinguishes between mistakes and defiance. The tassels symbolize identity, obedience, and remembrance. God wants his people to remember who they are and whose they are. God restores your worship so you can remember your identity. For women rebuilding after mistake, after trauma, after seasons of distance or hardships, this chapter affirms that God restores and anchors your identity. God invites you back into worship with him, back into identity, back into alignment with him. Your reminders, scriptures, affirmations, community, our sisterhood will keep you grounded in who God says you are. That is very important. Don't run away from him. Don't distance yourself from him. In those times of hardships, let that be times that you seek him harder, you pursue him further, you deepen your relationship with him. All right, looking at what did God require or ask of us? The command is honor his chosen, respect God's order, walk in humility, trust God's defense, accept correction, return to alignment, intercede for others, pray with compassion, believe his promise, walk in faith, see with faith, reject fear and unbelief, hold on to courage, stand against the crowd, trust his power, focus on God, not giants, do not rebel, Submit to God's leading. Intercede for others. Pray boldly. Bring offerings. Return to worship. Distinguish sin. Walk in awareness. Wear reminders. Stay aligned. And remember identity. Live as his people. All right, Leviticus chapter 19 through Numbers chapter 15, summary recap. So, this is really just here for you to screenshot. You can look at these scriptures as references. You can refer back. Um, We see God's holiness expressed through justice, worship rhythms, sacred vows, obedience, and restoration. We see where God organizes his people, assigns roles, purifies the community, and establishes consecrated worship. And we see where God prepares leaders, tests faith, confronts rebellion, restores worship, and reaffirms identity. So we move from calling to being challenged, to facing fear, to facing the consequences, to continued formation. God disciplines what he still intends to dwell with. What God is asking of us as women of God. So let's go through this list of things that he asks of us, taken from Leviticus chapter 19 through Numbers chapter 15. So live holy in daily life. Let holiness shape your speech, work, relationships, and integrity. We should guard purity and boundaries. We need to protect our spiritual, emotional, and relational health with conviction. He wants us to honor sacred standards, carry your calling with dignity, discipline, and reverence. Bring God your best. We should offer God excellence, not leftovers, in our worship, in our service, and in our life. Keep holy rhythms. We should build rest, worship, and remembrance into our weekly and yearly life. Uphold justice and reverence. Live with fairness, integrity, and deep respect for God's presence. Practice rest and restoration. Release what drains you and embrace God's cycles of renewal. Choose obedience and trust. Treat your promises to God with seriousness and integrity. He knows your heart. Embrace identity and purpose. Know who you are and where God has placed you. Stay centered around God. Keep God at the center of your decisions, home, and direction. Accept your assignment. Walk confidently in the role God has entrusted to you. Serve with reverence. Handle God's work with care, order, and intentionality. Pursue purity and integrity. Make things right quickly. Repair harm and restore peace. Live consecrated and blessed. Set aside seasons for deep devotion and spiritual focus. Give with unity and joy. Offer your gifts to God willingly, consistently, and wholeheartedly. Follow God's leading. Move when God moves. Stay when God stays. Bring burdens to God. Don't carry everything alone. Let God and community support you. Walk in humility. Stay grounded even when misunderstood or criticized. Choose faith over fear. See through God's eyes, not through intimidation or insecurity. Trust God's promises. Stand firm when fear rises. God is with you. And lastly, remember who you are. Let your identity in God guide your obedience. And as always, this is a reminder to get rooted in the Word, and stay rooted. All right, week 6, reflection, pause, and application. So we saw from the reading this week that leadership was questioned, promise was doubted, consequences followed, and still God stayed. God does not abandon his people after failure. He adjusts the timeline and continues the work. God holds people accountable without withdrawing his presence. My Lord, today we can learn. We can learn from that. We can learn a thing or two from that because we will totally withdraw ourselves from situations and from people who don't want to hold themselves accountable, right? So God holds people accountable without withdrawing himself from them. That's something that we need to learn. Calling, challenge, fear, consequence, continued formation is the um, is the layout that we see. It is the trend that we see through these chapters. So God disciplines what he still intends to dwell in. Okay. And so even though they're going through these different transitions in life, it is continued formation. So where has fear shaped our decisions more than trust? Are we still like the Israelites? We know we're on a path and we're on a journey into his promises. But do we still have fear and do we still have doubt? Are they shaping our decisions? Um, and so God addresses unbelief, not to destroy us, but to redirect us, get us back on track. Okay. So if this week felt heavy, it's because the text was very honest. God takes trust seriously because promise is costly. Delay is painful, but it is not the same as rejection. God continues forming us even when we have to sit with the weight of our choices. And boy, did they have to sit with the weight of their choices. God, we thank you for inviting us into your word this year. Please bless our effort. Study our hearts and shape us as we read. Form us into women, into people who reflect your character. Help us identify with your truth and allow us to grow in wisdom, in strength, and in faith. Let every page that we read draw us closer to you. In Jesus' name, amen. Congratulations! Always congratulations. You guys have to understand that you are really doing it. Like you're really reading, you're going through these books, you're learning. You have completed week 6. Congratulations. You have completed the book of Leviticus. Congratulations on that as well. Download your badges, post them. I'm very proud of you. I'm proud of myself as well. Keep going. I know life can get us caught up and get us put behind schedule, but just keep pressing on, keep pushing. Next week, the journey continues as we tune into season 4, episode 16 through season 5, episode 3. Next week, we're going to see deeper lessons on obedience, authority, and perseverance. We're going to watch how God remains faithful even when the wilderness lasts longer than expected. And so we will be covering, it's actually this week since this video is being posted late, Numbers chapter 16 through Deuteronomy chapter 3. And just like that, that concludes our week 6 review. I know it was a bit lengthy, but I am so glad you joined in. If this is something that you are interested in, I'm doing this weekly. Normally on Saturdays, these videos are posted. So forgive me, give me a little grace. Life happens, uh, and life on top of life happens. That's all I can say on that. But if this is something that you are interested in, please like, please comment. Follow on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, share, participate, subscribe, do whatever you need to do to stay connected so we can grow together in this effort. I'll see you next week if God say the same. Take care. I love you.